On September 26, 1983, a 44-year-old Soviet military officer named Stanislav Petrov was sitting alone in a bunker outside Moscow. It was just after midnight. His job was to monitor the Soviet Union's nuclear early warning system and report any incoming American missile launches to his superiors immediately. At 12:15 a.m., the alarm went off. The system showed one American intercontinental ballistic missile heading toward the Soviet Union. Then it showed 2, then 3, then 4, then 5. Petrov had a phone in each hand. One connected to his superiors who were waiting for his report. One connected to his staff who were waiting for his orders. If he reported what he was seeing, the Soviet chain of command would have had minutes to decide whether to launch a retaliatory nuclear strike. The Soviet military doctrine at the time was based on the assumption that if the Americans launched first, the Soviets had to launch immediately before their missiles could be destroyed on the ground. There would be no time for deliberation, no time for verification. A report from Petrov would almost certainly have triggered a Soviet nuclear response. Hundreds of millions of people would have died. Petrov looked at the data in front of him and made a decision that had no support in his training, his orders, or his military doctrine. He decided it was a false alarm. He did not report it. He was right. The Soviet early warning satellite system had malfunctioned. It had mistaken the sun's reflection off clouds over the United States for the heat signatures of missile launches. There were no American missiles. There was no attack. The world did not end on September the 26th, 1983, because one man, sitting alone in a bunker, trusted his instincts over his instruments and his judgment over his orders. To understand how close the world came to nuclear war that night, you have to understand the specific context of September 1983. It was one of the most dangerous moments of the entire Cold War. 3 weeks earlier, the Soviet military had shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, a civilian passenger jet that had strayed into Soviet airspace. 269 people died, including a US congressman. The international reaction had been explosive. President Reagan called it a crime against humanity and dramatically escalated his rhetoric against the Soviet Union. Soviet leadership was genuinely convinced that the United States might be preparing a first strike. Military forces on both sides were at heightened alert. The atmosphere of paranoia and miscommunication that night was the most dangerous the world had seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Into that atmosphere came Stanislav Petrov's alarm. The system was showing 5 missiles. Protocol was absolutely clear. Reported immediately. But Petrov noticed something that did not fit. A genuine American first strike would involve hundreds of missiles, not 5. Launching only 5 missiles made no strategic sense. The system was also relatively new and had not been fully tested. Petrov had been involved in its development and knew it had potential reliability issues. He had 4 minutes to decide. He picked up the phone to his superiors and told them the alarm was a false alarm caused by a system malfunction. He reported it as a system failure, not as an attack. Then he sat in the bunker and waited to find out if he had just made the worst decision in human history. 20 agonizing minutes passed. No missiles arrived. The alarm subsided. Petrov had been right. What happened next is the part of the story that most people do not know. Petrov was not celebrated. He was not promoted. He was not thanked. He was investigated. Soviet military investigators questioned him extensively about why he had deviated from protocol. He had made the right call, but he had broken the rules to do it. He was reprimanded for improperly filing his paperwork during the incident. He had been so focused on managing the crisis that he had recorded it incorrectly in his logbook. He was passed over for any military commendations. He was quietly reassigned to a less significant posting. He took early retirement shortly after. The Soviet military did not want the incident widely known because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that their early warning system had nearly triggered a nuclear war through a malfunction. Petrov was essentially ordered to stay quiet about what had happened. He did for years. The world did not learn about Stanislav Petrov until 1998, when a retired Soviet general mentioned the incident in a memoir. Journalists tracked Petrov down to his apartment outside Moscow. He was living alone, in poor health, on a small pension. When journalists and documentary makers began telling his story internationally, he received some recognition in his final years. He was invited to the United Nations. He received an award from a German organization. He was the subject of a documentary film. But the Russian government never formally acknowledged what he had done. He received no official recognition from Russia, no state honor, no pension increase, nothing. Stanislav Petrov died on May 19, 2017, at the age of 77, in his apartment outside Moscow. His death was not immediately announced. It was discovered months later when journalists tried to contact him. His neighbors did not know who he was. The man who had arguably done more than any other single individual to prevent nuclear war died alone and unrecognized by the government he had served. He said in interviews that he did not consider himself a hero. He said he had simply done his job. But his job that night was to follow protocol and report what he saw. He did not do his job. He did something better. He thought. And because he thought, and because he trusted his judgment over his orders in the most consequential 4 minutes in modern history, you are alive to hear this story. The question Stanislav Petrov's story forces you to ask is not whether individuals are capable of making better decisions than the systems they serve. The question is what it says about those systems that the man who saved the world was punished for saving it, and died alone while the world he saved had no idea who he was.